Welcome back here to Team Talk on ESPN Radio 1017 The Team. I'm Scott Galletti along with Sam Hauser. The number to call, 994-1017, 994-1017. As we've been talking a lot of stuff here, Brent Musburger, a special guest here today. We want to thank him for coming on. Right now, Sam, we have another special guest on the Daniels Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Cool Take Hotline.
Yeah, really looking forward to this one. Nicole Auerbach with The Athletic joins us now as she wrote a piece about UNM football. And Nicole, thanks so much for doing this and really for telling the story of just, what's already been a wild season for Lobo football. So my first question is, why now, and how did you find out about this story?
Well, I've been following it basically since the summer. There was a point earlier in the year where everyone was looking at all the various issues that were potentially going to stop people from being able to play games or really practice. And my colleague Chris Vanini and I did a story about travel restrictions in states, and that was right around the time where New Mexico was first starting to really grapple with this from an athletic standpoint. With the soccer team, obviously. And so, we talked to New Mexico, we talked to New Mexico State, and they were looking to see, what was happening with pro soccer and just in general in their conversations with the governor about what was going to be possible for them. So basically it's just kind of been on my radar all along that New Mexico, the state, was imposing restrictions and not really making carve-outs for their athletic teams like some of the other states were that have severe restrictions. So, it was just something I was monitoring, and then obviously tracking that they flipped the game to San Jose State, and then didn't realize actually that they had fully relocated when this week's game got moved to Las Vegas. Wasn't sure if they were staying on the road in between, so I figured I'd ask, and that's kind of where it all came about, just conversation with Eddie about how it works and just sort of like the logistics of all of this, because obviously if you go back into the state of New Mexico, you're supposed to quarantine after going to certain places. So, I had a feeling that they were probably staying on the road in between games, but did not really know the details until just a few days ago.
Nicole Auerbach with us on the Daniels Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Cool Take Hotline, college football reporter for The Athletic. So what kind of precedent do you think this could potentially set? Because, we've been trying to map out and forecast the college football season for months now. But, just as far as other teams potentially watching this with the Lobos being in Nevada and seeing how that's going, what kind of precedent do you think this could set? And do you think we could see more of this, even as early as this season or potentially beyond?
Yeah, I do think, if you're a team like Cal and you're running into issues with your local health department being really strict about contact tracing, kind of the letter of the law about CDC guidelines, and you're looking for a place that is less restrictive, again, in a place that makes sense. You don't want to go somewhere and just say, like, okay, we're not going to follow any of the rules, this isn't about health decisions, but going to a place that has more access to, some of the reasons that New Mexico has such strict guidelines it's about what hospitals can provide and about the number of trauma centers in a state and basically what happens if you get overloaded with COVID patients. So you can go to other places that have more resources and then have higher thresholds for various activities. So I think Cal, Justin Wilcox kind of floated this idea about taking the program on the road, if they continue to run into issues there. So I definitely think this is something that, you're going to see in other places. I know that, something you've already got to consider about basketball as well, because you're going to run into the same issues at all of these campuses in the state of New Mexico. So I could absolutely see people try to do this. I just see, some places shutting it down, but this is also essentially what the Toronto Blue Jays did during the baseball season as well, because again, it's about that 14-day quarantine when you travel. So you need to go somewhere that is willing to be flexible with you if you're following really strict protocols as a team, as a program.
Nicole Auerbach, college football reporter for The Athletic, our guest here on the Daniels Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Cool Take Hotline. And Nicole, you mentioned basketball. Well, that's what New Mexico State and the University of New Mexico are looking in terms of what they're going to do, because they can't practice right now except for groups of 5. And, the same thing happened with football. Well, if you're practicing in a group of 5, it's an 11-on-11 sport. You're not going to get anywhere, so that's why the Lobos football team is in Las Vegas. What do you see happening in terms of, or do you know from the conversation that you had writing the story in terms of what happens after this week? Because it seems like a week-by-week thing, but it doesn't seem a realistic opportunity for them to come back next week and practice and get ready for the next 2 road games.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And honestly, I think the college basketball questions are well beyond just these 2 programs in New Mexico. I mean,
I agree.
A number of programs already hitting the pause button. We've already seen at least 1 game get canceled. We're already kind of in that window. It's a sport that's indoors where you cannot be distant. You're right on top of each other. And we're talking about flu season and this time of year. Obviously, cases are exploding everywhere. So I don't even think it's just a question of how they're going to be able to practice. This is more of a question of how is this sport going to work? How are they going to get games in? Contact tracing, wiping out 14 days, that's multiple games. It's different than football as well, where the games are spaced out more. So I think there's some really real questions. Ivy League just called it. They're not having a winter basketball season this year.
Mm-hmm.
You have some real questions about, how is this going to work, especially non-conference games. So, yes, on the immediate level, they need to figure out how to practice and be ready if they're able to play. But I think, there's macro issues going on with that sport right now about even getting started in the first place and being able to play games anywhere.
Sam and I were talking about this before you came on the air, Nicole, and it's Nicole Auerbach with The Athletic, our guest. In terms of the football season, well, now you got SEC teams being affected. Number 1 Alabama's game canceled this week. How much more of a monkey wrench does that throw? Like you said, it's about getting the season completed, and the big question mark is the season itself. When you have high-powered programs like that affected, does that change things?
Well, I mean, I think there was a lot of attention around the 4 SEC cancellations, and now we're up to 11 FBS games this week. So I think in general, we're not in that different of a place than we were last week. But you've got to think that a lot of these cancellations are going to spill over into next week as well, because people will still be in isolation and contact tracing and in quarantine. So, I think things are dicey. I mean, you've got this situation where, everyone wants to get through the season, have some semblance of a national championship. But obviously there's more disruptions than there have been all season right now. And, I understand why people are like, oh, should things get pushed back, to get more regular season games in. But honestly, I really think it's about getting through the season. So if you continue to push things back, all you're really doing is adding more time in the winter where you can have more outbreaks. It's very different with basketball, which hasn't gotten started. For college football, the focus is on finishing it. For college basketball, I think you need to prioritize how to have an NCAA tournament. And how you're going to make that work from a bubble setting and prioritize that. And if that needs to get pushed, you do that. But to me, football, you're pretty close to the end line. And it's just about providing an opportunity that feels like a season. So that's what people are trying to do. They're trying to power through, the disruptions. Again, this week was the most disruptions we've had yet in a single week. But they, again, when you talk to people, they're like, this is what we were going to have to go through to get a season in. And they'll point to their protocols being, that the players have this carrot dangling in front of them of playing games, playing for championships and things. So they're doing the best that they can, and maybe they're being, even more careful than people in the public at large. The problem is that there's, outbreaks all over the country. Everywhere is a hot spot, and, so you really never know where you could be exposed. So, we'll see. I mean, but everyone has been committed to playing through these types of disruptions up until now, and I don't see that changing right now.
Nicole, I want to thank you so much for joining us here, and keep up the great work.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Nicole Auerbach from The Athletic, our guest on the Daniels Plumbing, Heating, and Air Conditioning Cool Take Hotline. And listening to her talk and her knowledge, Sam, it sounds more scary than it does good, doesn't it?
Well, it just sounds like we're back to where we were trying to prognosticate how the basketball season, how the NBA season was going to go, and how the Major League Baseball season was going to go. I mean, when we were in the middle of that with baseball, when the Marlins had their outbreak and the Cardinals, and then it went to the Cardinals, and there were a couple with the Brewers, and it just continued moving west, we never would have imagined having a World Series champion, and that ended up working itself out because the people in charge willed their way, and obviously, cases cleared up and guys got better, and the powers that be willed their way to a championship. And I mean, there's no reason to at this point to think that college football won't do the same thing.
No, absolutely. But when she was talking about basketball and even going to, has anyone thought, I'm sure they have, about a bubble for the NCAA tournament if they get that far? Because I'm sure they can't have it in all the sites that they have. They're probably going to have to just put it in one place or two places and leave it at that.
Yeah, and
I never thought about that until listening to her.
No, and that's why, I asked her the question about what we talked about earlier, that the Lobos might be the one that are doing the thing that's ahead of the rest of the country.
Right. Well, I think they're already starting with the football, like she said about Cal looking into it.
That's what I mean. The football team's starting now with Nevada. Like I think this is something that we got to get used to.
Mm-hmm. I know. You get to a place
and it stinks because the Lobos aren't. The Lobo football team's a state over, but
and let's preface. They're doing it not because they want to,
because
they're doing it because they have to.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course they're doing. Yeah, they wouldn't leave the city and the state by choice. They're doing it because they have to, and I mean that's where I'm at right now. Is we got to get used to it.
Yeah. How many more things do we have to get used to, Sam?
Well, we get to talk Masters next, so that's going to be fun.
That's going to be very fun. Yeah, quite a day, and Tiger's in the mix on the first day.
And nobody give Bryson DeChambeau the jacket yet. Don't you do it.
Yeah, I was wondering when you were going to bring that up. I'll try not to anoint him.
There was an article in the New York Post today that the title was don't give Bryson DeChambeau the green jacket just yet.
And your first question to me was who's giving it to him?
I mean, Bryson DeChambeau is no question he's become a fan favorite because he's kind of a tool, but as far as being the leader to win the Masters, like I was not aware that anybody was doing that.
Right. No, I wasn't either. And, he was kind of pedestrian today, I'd say.
Well, it's a weird day for everybody because they're going to be finishing the first round tomorrow, and we'll have another full day of coverage on 101.7 The Team.
Yeah, it didn't dawn on me that, hey, it gets dark early. And they're 2 hours ahead, so yeah, it's going to get dark earlier there. So
yeah, it's right about 5:30 Eastern when we heard the horns sound over the broadcast.
Right, about a minute after you called, the horns coming.
Well,
so that was pretty good.
Well, they were. I mean, you can kind of just tell. I mean, you listen to radio broadcasts long enough. Like,
I know.
It was sounding like they're getting ready to wrap this up, and so. It worked, the timing worked out much like it did with Brent Musburger calling during the last commercial of a break. They ended and we started right at 4 o'clock like we normally would have anyway.
Right. Yeah, I'm still trying to get over how that happened. We have another hour to go here on ESPN Radio 101.7 The Team. You're listening to Team Talk.
Well, taking another look at our travels here in the Duke City this Thursday evening. Cruiser